and welcome to Cinema Spectator, a show where an expert and a casual movie fan watch movies in the cinematic canon. Today, we watched The Godfather Part Two, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, starring Al Pacino, and I guess starring Robert De Niro. That's probably
definitely starring Robert De Niro.
Who's it's starring. Today, I'm joined with two guests because it's a special occasion. I'm joined with Isaac. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
And I'm also joined with Juzo Greenwood, who recorded the commentary with us yesterday.
Oh, God. Worst commentary of all time. So terrible.
And, I mean, let's... Isaac says he is forcing me to let him shill. So, Isaac, shill, and then we'll get into it.
Well, usually we open the show with an opening segment, but because we have Juzo and this movie's long and has a lot to dissect, we decided to just jump into it. If you enjoy the show, you can support us at patreon.com/ECFS Productions, throw a couple dollars our way, get access to that commentary track that Juzo just threw under the bus, and also have your ability to have your questions read on air. Other benefits, check it out. Give us a rating if you don't have any money. That helps. Or tell friends and family. That helps the show grow. We're not going to linger. We're not going to dilly-dally. Literally, this is like within the first 3 minutes. We're getting started. Cameron, do you want to give us intro on The Godfather Part 2?
Yeah,
we're not even going to do like what we saw this week or whatever. It doesn't matter.
We've kind of stopped doing that, actually.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Not on purpose. It just hasn't. It hasn't been reoccurring. I'll be honest. I haven't watched anything this week, so
I haven't seen anything that I really like. The Tom Hanks Western News of the World. I think you guys really enjoy that. But no.
I watched the last half of Flight with Denzel Washington. And
have you seen the first half?
No. and I watched more Justice League. There's like the ending finale of season 1 is like the Justice League in World War II, and it just lingers. It's honestly horrible. The rest of the show's all right, so I'm just cracking into season 2 on HBO and watching it with my brother. So there we go. We hit it for you.
Flight is a great movie. I mean, it is, and also the opening crash scene is probably one of the best things that director. It's the director of Back to the Future. I think it's one of the best things he's ever done. So you should check that out at least.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed what I saw in the ending half. I think it was pretty powerful. So
yeah, good movie. Really good movie.
Isaac, have you ever seen Back to the Future?
What the heck? Of course. What are you talking about?
All right. I'm just checking. Sometimes I say things and you're like, no, and I'm like, what? Wait, what?
That's what this show's about, you know.
I know,
I'm the
right?
dummy.
Yeah,
I don't watch enough of movies, I guess.
But Back to the Future is like essential viewing. You can't be a young man without growing up watching Back to the Future.
Well, I was fascinated to hear on the show you talking about seeing Harry Potter for the first time, because I don't think I've ever encountered someone who's watched the movies. Well, first of all, just seen the movies for the first time in their 20s, but let alone seen the movies and not read the books. Because there's totally stuff where I'm like, oh yeah, it would be very strange to see a man turn into a rat before your eyes. Because in the book, there's the context that sets it up. But since I have the book so ingrained in my mind, it's not surprising to me because I'm just like, oh yeah, he turns into a rat. Of course, anyone would know that. But it's almost like nonsensical. And I think I can't judge those movies objectively because there's just so much stuff I just am able to fill in just from my brain, library of knowledge of Harry Potter. But yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, it's totally true. I having that conversation, I was like, well, yeah, they do talk about that a lot more in the books, don't they? You're like this. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. What did you? You didn't finish that, did you, Isaac?
So our like family event of watching them with my sister resulted in us leaving like halfway through 4, and then
movie.
Austin. My sister's husband watched 5 without all of us and didn't want to watch it again. And then
oh no!
Now we're just on 6, and I watched everything up until the last 10 minutes of 6, and then it was like it was 11:30, and I was like, you know what? I gotta go. I'm sure that they're gonna win or whatever.
That's difficult enough without having seen 2. Those are 2 pretty key movies.
I mean,
6 I really like. I enjoy 6 a lot.
6 is very good.
Yeah, I thought it was fun. I mean. Honestly, like, even with all the stuff that I don't understand going on in them, I think the movies are sort of charming and just kind of wacky out there. So I don't hold it against it. I just find it hilarious, honestly. When I'm like, oh, of course, why aren't there weird love potions or whatever is happening there. So
Oh yeah.
Well, in any case, let's talk about The Godfather Part Two. This is an interesting movie to do because it's like I'm gonna do it again, Juzo. It's like 4 hours long, and it's a tough one, I would say, to watch in a lot of ways. This is a movie. Obviously, it's a sequel to The Godfather Part One. Came out in 1974. This was the same. Well, he was making it in term with a movie called The Conversation, which is a fantastic movie. I actually really, really love that movie.
Good movie.
And this is one that was one of the first examples of sort of a sequel, a straight up sequel in Hollywood. It was definitely one that spawned the franchise sequel sort of thing, the theme that Hollywood always likes to do now. This was at the very beginning of sort of Hollywood blockbusters. And that's one of the things that I do want to talk about in this in this episode, which we didn't really touch on last episode, was this is the rise of the new Hollywood movement. And specifically, I mean, Godfather Part One was definitely it was definitely the kickoff. But I think with this movie, you saw sort of almost like the budget went crazy, the talent went crazy. Everything involved is sort of heightened in this movie, and I think that's the sort of key distinction between the sort of late 60s, early 70s new Hollywood movement, where they're still sort of run and gun. They're very they're very inspired by the indie style of the 60s, and then now they're like it's not just the new Hollywood movement, it's the Hollywood movement. They have infiltrated all the film school brats. They've come into Hollywood and they're making movies now. And actually it's the next year, it's 1975 when Jaws comes out, where that's kind of the year that changes everything, I mean, in my mind. But
and the budgets get bigger and bigger, and it grows and grows until in the early 80s, there's a series of bombs, including one by Coppola, that basically end the movement and move Hollywood into kind of the modern blockbuster era, where things are a lot more safe and kind of, I don't know, marketable, I suppose, than auteur-driven.
Yes. Yeah, so, I mean, Coppola obviously is a really important figure in the new Hollywood movement, but I wouldn't say he's the most well-renowned of the movement. He's definitely one that has kind of left
nowadays, definitely.
But even during the movement, he had sort of maybe a 10-year run of really spectacular movies, and then after that he kind of he really, I wouldn't say he jumped the shark, but in some ways he never reached the heights again of this movie specifically, honestly. Even Apocalypse Now, which is, in my mind, probably his best movie. I mean, one of my favorite movies, definitely. But even Apocalypse Now was not never to the success of something like this. So.
It couldn't be because it was so expensive also.
Exactly. And it was terrible production, just everything involved. Yeah. Which I would love to go back and watch that with you, Isaac. I do want to do like a deep dive on new Hollywood, on the film school brats. I think it's kind of an important, it's a really important era, sort of a turning point in movie history. So.
Mm.
Yeah. Awesome. This movie is huge budget. And I noticed that right off the bat, because instead of just one big party scene at the beginning of the movie, there seems to be endless party scenes in this film. From the opening band playing to, the Havana sequence to, I thought there was one more party that I was just like, okay, this is getting
there's like the
too
big,
much.
the big 4th of July parade.
Yep. Oh, that's the other one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
So there's just massive set pieces, tons of extras, and even the ambition of tackling 2 different time periods, right? And the budget that goes behind that. You can tell that they are going for something. It doesn't. It's interesting because it doesn't feel as intimate as the first movie, but it does feel more linear because it's following like one single character's sort of like trajectory amongst all of it. Do you know what I mean? I don't know how to explain it, but it's like the first movie, it feels like there are just so many characters that you're trying to keep track of. And this movie, it's like there are other characters, you acknowledge them, you understand what they're doing, but really it's about Michael and Vito, right? Like that those are the 2 that they really hone in on, despite all the massive stuff going around the production and all that. So it definitely has a different feel than the first movie. I'm curious, Cameron, because you gave me some context before saying that you didn't enjoy this movie as much as the first one. What is this, your second viewing of Part 2?
Yeah, it's only my second viewing. Actually, the first time I was telling on the commentary, I was watching it in illicit means, and so there was no subtitles for the Italian part. So what I did was I pulled up the script, and this is something that I actually did a lot back then. But I pulled up the script and I read along with the movie. So I really enjoyed doing that. I might have liked the movie better had I done that this time. Well, because this is a movie where you actually kind of do want to read along with what's happening, because there's so much going on, and sometimes you find yourself like you find yourself like wanting to like go back and be like when you read a paragraph and you go back and you start the paragraph again because you didn't quite get all of it, and you sort of retread that paragraph. That's kind of what I wanted to do sometimes in this movie, except it was a commentary, so I couldn't like rewind. But if I had been able to read along with it, I think that's one way where, because it's so dense with it's just a lot. There's a lot happening in the movie, and it's very plot driven, I would say. At the very least, up until the first intermission, it's almost like hard to follow. In a lot of ways, it's hard to keep track of what's going on, and I think it's also hampered by the fact that it is going back in time. It is kind of jumping between 2 storylines. I think for me that gets way better in the second half, after the intermission. But the first half, I think, is kind of taken down a peg, because you're even though you're following Michael and his story, there's no direction necessarily in the first half. There's only a direction after he comes back, I guess when he goes to Cuba. And then he realizes, he has some revelations in Cuba. That is sort of where the direction starts to pick up, and that's why I think the second half is much better. But I digress.
Juzo, I'd like to know your thoughts on the movie, because Cameron has a little bit of. I mean, maybe you didn't clarify it, Cameron. Did you enjoy it a second time watching it more or less? That's kind of what I wanted to know.
Less than the first time.
Okay. How about you, Juzo? What are your thoughts on Godfather Part 2? And even you can fill us in on your thoughts on Godfather Part 1, because I'm sure you listened to that episode and had some opinions.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and I have many questions for you as we're talking about the Godfather one. But I revisited both movies, and the Godfather one, in some ways I empathize with your point of view, and because the first time I saw it, I think it is hard to follow a lot of these things. It is a lot of politics and plotting and different characters to follow, and so. But once I got a hold of that and I saw it the second and third time, I'm talking about the first movie. It's great. Like, that movie to me is just, every scene is a home run. Everything about it is great. I saw it with my dad, like, at night after we had spent a day I didn't get enough sleep. Like, I was totally expecting to check out halfway through, and we were just riveted for 3 hours. Just unbelievably great. And then the second movie, I don't know. In some ways, I feel more kind of a sense of respect with that movie than enjoyment. The first movie is a pleasurable experience that I would just throw that movie on like for fun, but well, maybe not like for fun like Goodfellas or something like that, but it definitely is enjoyable. But the second movie is I don't know, I find it just incredibly languorous and incredibly not like difficult, but it just feels very long. And there are elements in it that are great. There are sequences that are great, but there are also parts in it that feel a little bit more menial. It feels less connected to character the way it is in the first movie, where I think everything is tied to the relationship of Vito and Michael's sort of grand arc he goes through in Godfather 1. In the second movie, there are things that are connected to Michael's arc, but there are also things that just feel like that are just telling the plot or like exposition or that sort of thing, where it feels a little bit more, I guess, kind of like busy work, I guess is how I describe it. So it's definitely a good movie. There's no way I could say this is not a good film. It's just too well made, too well thought out in terms of the character progression, and ultimately the tragedy aspect of the movie is very affecting. But it's not, to me, it's not even close to the first movie. I would say it's not even in the same ballpark of quality.
Yeah, I'm conflicted on my opinions about watching the second film, because this is my first time watching both of the movies, right? And we had a conversation about the first movie and talking about how like consecutive viewing or, watching it more helps you chew on those characters and fall in love with them when their portrayal is grounded and very real in the first movie, right? And so it takes a little bit of time. They're not kind of charismatic or over the top so you can fall into place with who they are. You sort of have to observe. It almost feels like like a documentary almost, like where you're like viewing them and they're not responding in a wild way, and then when they do, you're reminded it's a movie, right? So like the second movie, and I don't mean to compare it to like these films in a negative way, but like I think about the original Star Wars trilogy and then the context that the prequels give, right? And the prequels are not good films, right? But it's almost difficult to imagine the world around the original trilogy without the context of the prequels now, because you're established in it, right? So watching Part 2 for me was like a furthering establishment of the world around the first movie, right? You're continually reminded of the existence of the first movie, even in the like rewinds with Vito's character. And I was thinking to myself, right, like Vito's introduction and origin story was something that I wanted to experience in the first movie, even if it would have been out of the way and ruined the pace of the movie, because it was like, I can understand where this guy is coming from, like I was like, I can root for this person, he has a sympathetic story. Whereas my first viewing of Part 1, I was like, I'm not really quite sure why I'm following this person. I'm not really quite sure what I'm experiencing besides what Cameron was describing as like that genuine interest of seeing behind the curtain and the world, the mob culture, right? Like kind of being exposed to that. I enjoyed how this movie tried to really hone in like with a microscope on Vito and Michael. And that, to me, as I talked about in my first review, like it felt like it kind of removed those binoculars and I could begin to like feel these characters and understand like who they are. And so for that credit, I enjoyed it, right? The structure and the way that the plot is driven in this film feels a little bit not like disorganized or well planned, but there was just a lot of stuff because the movie's so long where I was like, why exactly am I seeing a lot of this? And then considering the pace and editing of the first movie, right? Like I began to think about how and this was partly in my conversation with my girlfriend's dad who absolutely loves the first movie. He's Italian. He like that movie is like part of his legacy, it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things he said to me about the first film was like he was just saying like this movie has so many iconic scenes that stick with you. And he starts going through like, you know, leave the gun, take the cannoli, right? Or the horse head scene, right? And he starts naming off all these moments in it. And he's like, or the moment where the guy gets like shot in the eye at the massage parlor and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of pace and iconic stature, even though I didn't love the first movie, like I was like, he's right. You know, he's right. The first movie does have that memorable, like, hardiness to it. And this movie just feels like the peppering all around that. I mean, like, for me, the 4th of July sequence was like super awesome in this movie, but there's so much of it that feels extra. Like I didn't need it to be 3 hours long. There were so many characters that, I mean, for example, like the senator character, who is sort of like an early introduced sort of like a counterforce to what Michael wants to do, sort of falls flat and into place with Michael's plan. And then I'm just like, well, like, I don't really understand like his impact as a character. I don't really understand like his like they're spending a decent amount of time with him for not much return is kind of how I felt about his structure. And there were many scenes.
True.
Yeah, there were many scenes in this movie where I was like, I feel like some shaving could have happened, and it left me with a confusion at the end. Whereas the first movie, it's like I understood it, but I didn't feel it. This movie, I didn't understand it, but I felt it. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't know how.
Interesting.
That's sort of my takeaway, because I was like I feel like Michael's emotion brewing. I feel Vito's, you know, past and his presence as this leading crime figure. But when the end rolled, I'm sitting there trying to chew on like, okay, Michael's talking about I only murder my enemies, not my friends. He doesn't understand the meaning of family anymore. There's that flashback scene of him at the table. I'm like, so he just, I like, I'm sure that there's complexity, because I was talking to my brother about it. He's like, oh yeah, that movie is very complex. You can pull it apart. I was like, he just hates family, or he wants to destroy everything his dad built. Like, but I kind of like his dad now, you know, like, I mean, because I just got the backstory, right? So I'm a little confused about the analytical takeaway of this movie.
Well, Michael, he's a difficult character because he goes from being totally outside the family to, by the end of the first one, and this is kind of what we were talking about on the commentary, by the first one, he becomes pulled in. He's sucked into this life. And then and at the end, I think you see it again. This is what the flashback is for. He gets pushed out because he was always an outsider. He was always someone who was not involved in the family. He didn't understand the way that things work. And so now that he's become fully wrapped in it, his mind has been sort of not just corrupted, but he's become twisted in a way that he doesn't understand his family, and his family doesn't understand him. There's a complete severance between these two groups of people, and I think that's what the second movie does really brilliantly, in my mind. Is it goes from Michael as a sort of protector, leader, you know, someone who's the head of the household, to being betrayed on all sides, being completely alienated from everybody else in his family, and then being reminded at the end that he was always the outsider. He was never the one who was supposed to lead. He was never the one who was supposed to be take up the mantle. He was always supposed to be, as Sonny said, his dad had high hopes for him, and that's what the impact of that last scene is, and what it's sort of trying to establish in your mind is that he's not the man for the job.
Yeah, I felt like it was hard for me to pull that away, and it makes sense what you're saying. Like, I understand it because it's just you've interpreted it. It makes sense. I didn't get there with it, and maybe it's one of those movies you gotta watch more. I agree with everything you're saying. Like, that makes sense. I was left really grasping that, or really like trying to get there. I'm like, I don't understand it. Like, I wish I could understand it, and I don't know if it's just because it's my first time watching it, or if it's the fault of the movie or something like that. So I'm not entirely sure. Juzo, what do you think?
Well, the meaning of it, I mean, it definitely putting them side by side. I mean, seeing the contrast between the two of them is a big part of the first movie, but putting them in these sort of parallel structure really kind of like fully hits home Coppola's ideas about one person entering a life of crime out of, survival, providing for his family, and in many ways out of compassion for his family, and also compassion for his community. Him because part of his, taking out that guy, the Fanucci, when his gun catches fire, is to free the neighborhood from this guy who's just treating everyone horribly. And then Michael, of course, is doing all this, to serve his own ego and to serve just his sense of control. And even at the end, Hagen is kind of like, do you really need to kill everyone? And he's like, well, yeah, I do. I have to kill all my enemies. It's just what I do. And so he's completely devoid of any, he has nothing. He doesn't care about anything. And it's like, there's definitely, I think my dad wrote this actually in the movie has been talked about in comparison to the idea of the American dream a lot. I know my dad, when he was in college, he wrote an essay about this, and it was, about how, it starts as something that's idealistic and aspirational and romantic, and it becomes just, running your family like a business, and just sort of like calcified into something really cold and unfeeling and cruel in many ways. So that's what I get. There's definitely a lot to get out of the movie in that regard. My complaints about it are more sort of gut level, I suppose, than intellectual.
Well, I'd like to hear some of those, because I'm having a hard time, because I spent a decent amount of time trying to think about like how I felt about this movie, and I'm very unsure. I'll just say it outright. Like, I'm not sure how I how I feel about this film yet. So I'm curious to hear what the experts have to say about it. Like, Juzo, what are some of those nitpicks that turn it off compared to the first for you?
It's tough because there are not really scenes that are bad. There's not really anything in it that's like horrible. It's just, there are just parts of it where like, another scene in the courtroom, another, Hyman Roth going on about whatever nonsense he's talking about. And I don't know, I'm just bored watching it, and it's just not, and it's, as I said earlier, it's devolving away from Michael's character. And whenever it goes back to Michael and his wife, or Michael and Fredo, that to me is where it gets, I become compelled again. And I think that's why the stuff with De Niro and Vito works so well, because that you're seeing in every scene, it's revealing something about his character and about his journey from immigrant to mobster, basically. And and also those scenes I just think are just really well done. Like, I think just De Niro is, it's not that Pacino's fantastic in the movie, but De Niro is just so compelling and so kind of vivid watching him, and those scenes just look great. They just have like a beautiful, I just love the kind of nostalgic look of the early turn of the century stuff. And Little Italy, New York. It's just beautiful. And I think you said earlier the whole 4th of July assassination sequence is I think by far the best set piece of the movie. I mean, I do love the scene between Michael and his wife at the end. That's another great scene. But as a set piece, that whole thing of killing Fanucci is just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in my mind, the problem with the movie comes down to specifically like it feels like it needs to be shaved down. It feels like it needs a little bit of maybe just clarity, I guess. Maybe cut out some of the things. I was thinking about it when you were talking, because there's obviously the famous George Lucas quote is that there's 2 movies and one of them doesn't work, and which I don't think is very true. But I literally think there's no world outside of 1974 where these wouldn't have been like a sequel and a prequel. Like there's no world, 20 years later, 10 years later, it doesn't matter. This would have been a sequel and a prequel. But then I was thinking about it and how much less I wanted to see that, because like I don't want more of of those scenes. Like I don't want more expansion into the narrative. I don't know if you would need to, but I'm sure with the Vito stuff, I like that's like maybe a third of the movie. And like
I probably could have watched the whole movie of the Vito stuff, but
yeah, I mean, yeah, I could see the some expansion there, but with Michael, it's just like it's pretty laborious. Especially, I think the first hour is just not good. Not that it's not good, but it just never captures my interest in the same way that the first one does. And I think in a lot of ways it's trying to sort of recapture the same feeling of the first one, and not really pulling it off in a lot of ways. I don't know. I think it's almost like what I say is the Tarantino syndrome, where it's trying to imitate its past self, which is weird because it's only like 2 years later. So you'd think it wouldn't need to imitate itself. It would just be itself. But in my mind, like the first hour of the movie is really trying to evoke the essence of The Godfather Part One. It's trying to remind you that this is a sequel to that movie. With the see, Michael is dealing with the people in the dark room, and there's the party going on outside, and there's and it's like retreading some of this ground that almost doesn't really need to be retread. It's I don't want to say like it's a parody of the first one, but in some ways it kind of feels like that. It feels like there's like a little bit of imposter syndrome going on. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It gets much better during the later half.
I think it's super interesting that they chose to do this like compare and contrast of young Vito and like mid crime life Michael, whereas I could have seen it almost be a compare and contrast directly with the first movie in the way that his father ran the business. In like, does that kind of make sense? Where it was like it would show that dark room run by Vito and then the dark room run by Michael, and to further like just enhance that difference of leadership. The comparison between young Vito and like older Michael is, it feels like they're almost on 2 separate journeys, where I wish they almost would have like paralleled the journeys in a way that was more black and white for a dumb audience member like me. And I know maybe most people wouldn't want that, but I was like, I kind of was starting to appreciate how like Vito's motivation was in that familiar, like, or like in a family oriented protection, almost like vigilante sort of like approach, right? And then Michael would have just been fully like selfish. But instead, like it feels like Vito's abandoned in the last half of the movie, and Michael is just being unlikable, if I'm being honest. Like I just don't I don't know.
I think it's fair to say he's unlikable.
Yeah,
Sure.
he's I would have liked some contrast almost to commentate on Michael's bad behavior and almost like shame it in a way, but it doesn't really do that. I don't know. Like, I don't know what Michael's revelation really evokes in him, because he's so sterile in his reaction. You know, he's just got sort of like, okay, my brother's dead, and now I'm remembering this, and I'm an outsider. I'm like, what are you, like a middle school, like a goth middle schooler? You know, like, yeah, it's just like, come on, man. Like, I wish that there was some sort of, like, I know this is crazy, but what if there was a 4th of July scene with Vito, and then an opposite scene of Michael, like the other side of the coin? I wish it was like more direct in that way, because I had a hard time like embracing the back to like the rewind in time when it felt so disconnected from what Michael was, even though I know they were trying to show that those differences that we're talking about. Like, I wish they felt more connected so that it would lead to a greater impact at the end, right?
I think there's an inevitable contrast that you can't avoid just because their situations are so different. Because there's not going to be a scene where Michael stalks and kills someone, because Michael's the head of a crime family and Vito is just like he's just a guy at that point. But I think Coppola makes the point pretty clear by showing the reasoning behind the hits that Michael puts out on people, as opposed to the ones that you see Vito doing. Vito kills a guy who's harassing the neighborhood and threatening his family and being just a real jerk, and then he kills a guy who killed his mother, and then Michael, by contrast, even though it's not like a 1-to-1 contrast, but you are seeing like he's killing people. First of all, he's killing his own brother, and he's killing out of paranoia and out of selfishness and out of greed. So you are seeing those parallels. And also another thing you're seeing, or in some ways maybe it's like you're seeing a contrast by its presence, the presence of Vito's love of his family in that section of the movie, and the way he cares for them and spends time with them and seems affectionate. And then Michael, who doesn't spend any time with his family and doesn't really, and the way he treats his wife is terrible, and the way he treats his kids is, basically completely absent. So even though it's not a direct, it's not them both killing a guy on the 4th of July, it's you do see the contrast, I think, still.
Yeah. No, I guess it was my dumb movie popcorn brain that I was like, I just wish it was laid out in a way that didn't make me grasp.
Well, I understand it, because there's so much to process in the movie that you're just like, oh god,
Well, I do think it's a little bit strange, because there's way more time you spend with Michael than you get with Vito, and that almost makes you feel, in sort of the pacing and the structure of the movie, it almost makes you feel like one story is more important, or one story is more like heavily leaned on, and the second story is more of like an afterthought. But I don't think that's true even necessarily. Like, I think Vito's story maybe is more enjoyable for sure, because it's a single, sort of a single operation that you can understand, that you can get behind his motivations, and at the end it's very satisfying. He has that full circle in the same way that I think the first one ends in a very satisfying way. There's like a full circle. A full circleness to Vito's story, but it also comes at like the falling action of, or no, at like the rising action of Michael's story. Like the finale of Vito's story comes like way before anything important happens in Michael's story. I mean, important things are happening, but it's not the climax. It's not anything, in sort of in that way. So I do think it's fair for someone to say like, well, like I didn't feel like there was that much of a comparison, because in some ways, like just the structure of the movie lends itself to not be as compared, I guess.
Yeah, and I found like there were so many different set pieces and locations that they were jumping between in Michael's story. For like everything in Tahoe was super cool. Like I was like, I really
Beautiful.
enjoy this aesthetic. It's different. It feels fresh. And then he's talking about going to Florida, which I can't even tell you if there's a scene in Florida. I can't tell if they're in Florida or Havana. And I know that's weird, but they talk about Florida so much, and then all of a sudden he's in Havana, right? And I'm like, wait, what is? And then there's the Cuban Revolution is happening. I'm like, what the heck? Why is all this stuff in here? And
I think Roth lives in Florida, right?
Yes, I think
so.
Yes.
That scene in the house is technically in Florida, but you don't get like. It doesn't really matter. I don't need like shots of palm trees and like Miami Beach or something.
But they spend so much time showing context of dumb parties and context of
It's
like
true,
other
it's true.
things.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, now we're in a court hearing. I'm like, what? Where did this come from? Like I didn't understand like that came out of nowhere. It's now we're gonna explain it like 5 minutes later when the guy who got strangled didn't die, and now we're having these court hearings. I'm like, okay, like I'm lost with understanding, I guess, sort of maybe they're just trying to say that like Michael has adversaries like everywhere, and that's why he's so like paranoid, because there's just so many wars he's fighting on different fronts or something. But I wanted there to be kind of a counter, like a villain to what Michael's doing, but I don't know. I found it difficult to follow who he was fighting, and maybe that was the point. I don't know. Is that the point? It was like I was like, who is he?
I don't know.
It was.
No, I'm with you with the frustration about some of these things, because I don't know. I don't know if you've listened to the commentary recorded yet, but I was like borderline falling asleep at a certain point in this movie where I'm just like, all right, whatever, get to the Fredo stuff.
Yeah, well, I think the like that's why I say it's like kind of I would rather read this movie than watch it in a lot of ways, because I think as sort of a novel or as a book, and maybe this is just because Mario Puzo is not a screenwriter, he's a novelist, but in a lot of ways you see how well strung those pictures, those like pieces of the puzzle are drawn, like it's so intricately laid out, and everything connects to each other. The Roth connects to the guy who was almost strangled, who connects to the brother character who they fly in, who connects, and everybody connects. Fredo is in the middle of things, and there's like, and then by the end it does the same thing like it does in the first one, where everything is sort of goes in the right direction for Michael in one fell swoop. But in some ways that is much more difficult to do in a movie than it is to do in something like a book, because I think part of it is the repetition of reading something, right? You read a name many times, and then you get that in your brain, and when you watch it, all these names, they sound the same, and you're like I don't know, like sometimes you forget like who is who, what is going on, like what are their motivations, what are they doing, and I think I understand what you mean, Isaac, where it's like yeah, sometimes you're like, well, I don't know, like I don't know who Michael is fighting or going after, and I mean I kind of know why, because everybody's trying to kill him, but why are they trying to kill him? Like what's the deal with that?
Well, I'm also just very confused a lot about who, like, how does Michael know these things, or how he's doing all these sort of gambits with Roth, and what's the guy's name, Pentangeli or something like that? I don't understand how he's figured that out, or even some of the Fredo stuff. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, and then he has all those meetings, right? He's meeting with Fredo, he's meeting with bald drunk Italian guy that I don't remember the name of, and he's meeting with the Florida dude, and he all tells them different things. And I'm like, is he investigating or does he know? Like, that's what I couldn't figure out. I was like, does he know or is he investigating? Like, and then there's like that great scene where like Michael does have that realization, right? Later in Havana, where Fredo is talking drunk out loud and he says he knows that guy, right? And that's a great scene. Like, I thought that
Wonderful.
scene was
Amazing.
awesome.
Great moment, yeah.
But I was just like, so he did, like, I don't know. Like, I mean, it made all the other meetings I was just confused. So I was like, oh, he was investigating, but I don't know how he. And then I couldn't tell, like, did he try to put the hit on the bald guy, or was it someone else that was trying to kill the bald guy who went to the FBI?
No, he.
Where they tried to strangle him in the bar.
Yeah.
I think that was the Rosado brothers or Roth.
Yeah.
Who work for the
or Michael?
No, the Roth.
It wasn't Michael.
The Rosado brothers worked for Roth, but I think Roth was trying to put the hit on him so that there was like he was sowing division. But I don't really understand. That's what I mean is like I don't know why like what the sort of rivalry is. But that's why I think that's what I mean is the last half of the movie is so much better because it doesn't. Whatever you watched up to that point, it doesn't really matter. What you know is that he's gonna kill all these people, and like Michael, in some ways, he turns into, and this is what I was saying on the commentary, he turns into a horror movie villain. Like he turns into like a ghost or like a like Freddy, like he's someone who climbs out of the shadows to kill people. And in the first movie, it's more like he's the organizer. But in this movie, it just feels like he's there. He's there. He's the one. I think the first movie it was a calculated hit in all of these situations. In this one, this is revenge, which is what makes it almost scarier than the first one. This is going for blood.
I don't know. It doesn't feel as good as the revenge that Vito gets in Italy, right? And that's why I almost and then the reason I brought up like comparing, contrasting for a dummy viewer like myself, right? Is I would have thought that instead of flashbacking to the scene where Michael's left at the table, which I do think is a good flashback, I think it adds a lot to where Michael is and what he's feeling. But I was like, I would have rather had like very fast cuts between Fredo getting shot in the boat and Michael watching from the house, and then Vito like stabbing the guy who killed his parents, Like, what if that was just like interspliced? That interaction like would have elevated so much of like the hard difference between who Vito is, like why he's killing and where his motivation is, and how Michael is just like bloodthirsty. He's not even doing it. He's just watching it. Like it's like that would have been like way more impactful and almost like, again, you were saying, Cameron, like it justifies that would have justified the entire time spent with Vito in the background. Like it would be both of them crescendo at the same time. Like that was what was so frustrating for me. I was like, I wanted to feel that crescendo for both of the stories in a similar place so that I could understand why I was watching both of them. Even though you're right, Juzo, like you can compare them. But
I agree about the pacing. I agree that it's the sort of whiplash of the pacing between the two sections is not fantastic. I think if you were to cross cut them the way you're talking about, it might seem a little like almost too on the nose or too. I think it would almost seem moralistic or sort of like Coppola was like really trying to like make like shame Michael almost in a way that I think would be a little bit too obvious. But I don't know. It would be kind of interesting, I suppose. But you definitely do get the contrast in the movie as it is, because of Michael. I mean, I don't think Fredo even really knew he was complicit in the hit on Michael, right? Like he seemed, when the guy called him on the phone, he seemed genuinely shocked, and he seemed sincere that he didn't know they were going to kill Michael. So, Michael is really just killing him because he's paranoid and because he's, just so, obsessed with control over people.
Well, and also he felt betrayed. I mean, I think that's the biggest motivation. He just felt betrayed by Fredo. And nothing that Fredo could have done to say, I didn't know, I didn't mean to do it. It was almost like that moment, that final meeting in the chair, the famous chair with Fredo, which I love. I just love that sequence. It's incredible.
That's the third great scene in the movie. Yeah.
That sequence, he says, I didn't know, Michael, they approached me. And Michael says something like, and you believed them? And that's the only thing he says, to Fredo. He says, you believed that story? And then he goes on, to sort of deflect in the rest of the conversation. And so like, it's almost he's betrayed not even just by the action, but by the stupidity and the disloyalty of Fredo. He's betrayed by everything that Fredo has done, whether purposeful, has led to the position that Michael's in. And so he's almost blaming. I think he blames Fredo as well for the breakup of his family. And I think that's kind of the, I don't know. I think that's in a lot of ways, that's the thrust of the rest of the movie, is everything, his entire motivation from then on out is, don't kill Fredo while my mother's alive, but he's gone, he's a liability to me. But I think what's really fascinating about that last dinner sequence, and I actually really agree with you, Juzo, is I think if they just ended on Michael sitting at the table, that would have been like perfect.
I agree.
Awesome.
I agree with that. Yeah, that would have been way cooler.
But the last that last scene, the only person who's standing up for him in that scene is Fredo. And this is a memory. This is Michael's memory. He knows, like he it's almost like a sadness that this is how things had to be, or like a somberness that like he's disappointed in Fredo almost. I feel like it's very that final scene has like so much density packed into it.
I don't know if he's disappointed. I think he's more regretful of his own actions than disappointed. I mean, I don't know how much he is even able to feel anything at that point, but to me, it strikes me more that he's mistaken, because as much as Fredo screwed up, I think there's definitely a case to be made that what he did wasn't as terrible as it wasn't deserving of the punishment he got, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I'm just inherently sympathetic because I like Cazal. I think he's wonderful, but
in the first movie, I mean, you see the relationship brewing in the first movie, which is why I think it's really impactful in this one.
I don't know. Like when Fredo showed up in this movie, I'm like, who is that again? Like I don't even remember him from the first movie, besides him being like involved at the casino and speaking out against Michael. That's the only scene I really remember with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's what I mean. Is like that's the relationship of Michael and Fredo being, he's the weak one who is prone to betray his family on accident. And that's set up in the first movie, I which is like so brilliant.
Yeah.
Is that comes full circle in this one. And like that is his character. He's the one who's prone to sell out his family on accident. And And I think Michael sees that just like right off the bat. He knows that's Fredo's character, and he gives him so many chances too. Like Michael, the sequence in Havana where he says, "You're still my brother. Like, come in the car." I said jokingly, like, Fredo made the right move to not go in the car, but like, but in some way, I think Michael was genuine in that moment. Like, I don't think Michael wanted any ill will on Fredo. I think he knew what happened in some ways, but I think he was willing to give him another chance until he realized how dumb Fredo is. But I don't know.
Yeah, one of the frustrating things about Michael's character is that he never seems to acknowledge any failure in himself. And I know that's probably by design, but it makes him just almost unbearable for me to like want to watch, like I'm like, you're just not very like, I just find it difficult to even find sympathy, because I maybe like, maybe it's just me, this is probably a subjective issue, but if I'm watching like films about like these evil criminals or something like that, right, I really love like the whole conversation around morality and like even like self morality, and it doesn't even seem like it's like Michael just isn't even aware of morality at all, and it seems unhuman, like that's what's so frustrating about it for me with him and his character in this film. Like, at least in the first one, you kind of feel like he doesn't like the life and he's pulled into it to become that monster, right? And but now that's just there's nothing there. There's nothing at all, and I'm like, okay, like I would rather watch Vito. That's pretty much how I felt about the whole thing. And it, of course, like you were saying, like De Niro is he's awesome. I was excited. I had no idea he was in this movie. So when I saw him, I was like, no way. Like, this is so exciting, And he didn't disappoint. I was like, maybe I'm just being biased because, I liked him in Goodfellas and The Irishman and stuff. But I was just like, no, he's just lightning. He's awesome.
And Taxi Driver. I think actually Taxi Driver is the most like 1-to-1, maybe not 1-to-1, but it's a similar role and a similar performance, I would say, to this. I think we were talking about how Pacino goes in a completely different direction with his career, and I think De Niro does too a little bit. I think, I don't know. De Niro has had phases of his acting career in my mind.
Meet the Parents or whatever.
Well, yeah, he started to get into comedy in the last,
which is terrible. I mean, he doesn't work he's not a comedic actor, I don't think.
I think it's like he realized how funny he was in the because in the Scorsese movies he's hilarious, like he's amazingly funny, and then he's like, oh, I guess I should be a comedian now. But his actual comedies are just, well, I don't know, I haven't seen most of them. But
it's a great De Niro role, just a killer De Niro role. Cape Fear, woo.
Yeah, that's great.
He plays just the most awful human being in the universe. It's amazing.
It's a really terrifying villain. It was basically Scorsese's follow-up to Goodfellas, and it's just a pure thriller.
It's awesome. It's a
pretty great movie. That was interesting. What you going back at a few things though, what you're saying about Pacino and about Michael being unsympathetic, because it is true that he's not. He is a very cold character. I mean, I think in some ways though, I like that about these movies, that they are so uncompromising. They don't bring you into his head, and they're not trying to make you like him. And it's not like Henry Hill making all these kind of excuses for himself. It's just you're seeing the world from his point of view. You're not seeing the victims. You're just seeing what it's like to live in this sort of life and to slowly cut yourself off from every kind of emotion and love in your life. it does make it for a sort of a cool experience, and it does make it, I think, part of the reason why these are not movies, even the first movie, that I would return to for just like, oh, have fun on a Friday night with the boys type of thing, you know. But I think in terms of what Coppola is saying about, you know, living in this way, it's effective nonetheless.
Yeah, and I actually think this is something that Coppola does really really effectively, is he takes people who maybe are not as normal as you know, not people you can't really relate to necessarily, and like he doesn't have the everyman character, but he then pushes it like way past its breaking point. And I think this movie is like, this is, you know, the first Godfather is Michael getting up to his breaking point. This movie is him just being pushed way further, and way down into sort of the depths of his psyche. And I think a movie like Apocalypse Now is very similar, where it's a movie about the journey from being sort of a strung out, you know, do as you're told soldier to you know, just basically a monster, and seeing so many horrifying things along the way that it you know, it changes your world. It changes your relationship to the real world. And I think in a lot of ways, it's much more human than a filmmaker like Coppola, or sorry, like Kubrick. I think Kubrick has, one of the reasons why he is interesting is he's got like the worldview of an alien. He's someone who is so distant from humanity that he's viewing it through like a completely different lens. And why that's, I mean, I find it fascinating, but it's alienating for a lot of people, I would say. But these movies, I think, are much more human. They feel like real people. They feel like real stories. And even as much as they're, you know, completely unsympathetic or completely devoid of morality, they still feel like you got from where he was to where he is now. And I love that about it. Like the first and second movie as a package, I think, is really where the arc of Michael's character works so well. It goes from, you know, him being an honorable person to being the, you know, the revenge killer, destroyer of worlds, you know, this sort of horrifying person by the end.
I don't know. I think my hang up with Michael is that the rest of the world is grounded. The rest of the world feels so human, you know, and to see him in this second movie almost break away from that. Maybe that's the design around him, but I don't feel like he does feel kind of alien to me. And I don't know. Everybody else seems to have such humanity in this movie. And that's maybe why some people would say like, oh, he's great because of that. But it feels, I mean, you just compared him to a horror slasher, you know, like almost like a mythical creature, you know, like I'm like,
well, that's what he turns into by the end. But that's why I think the important thing is to get from part one to part two. Like that's where the big arc comes from. It's from being, you know, a man who just came from the army, who just, you know, is having he's got this nice young girlfriend who's a school teacher, you know, to being the slasher villain. Like that's, I don't know. I think that's a cool transition of a character. It's, you know, in some ways,
it's not unlike things like Breaking Bad.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
It turns someone who is who's perfectly reasonable, perfectly honorable, but feels like he has a duty to his family or a duty to his, to this side of him, to someone who's completely paranoid, destroying the relationships with his family, destroying everything that his dad sort of built up, destroying those relationships, and then reflecting on sort of how he got here from the path that he was on. Like I think that's really neat. I think that's like such a cool storyline, and in my mind, I don't know, I don't want to say I'm conflicted about the movie because I do really enjoy it. I enjoyed watching it this time a lot. But I think if you can sort of get past the hangups of the fact that it is really long, the fact that you're not really going to follow a lot in the first hour and a half, the fact that it's a little bit alienating and hard to get involved with in some ways. There's a lot of special moments in this. There's a lot of special. It's packed with not just things to learn and things to reflect on, but it's packed with like so much character, and it really does feel like a Shakespearean tragedy or like a novel. It feels in a way like you are getting the like way more bang for your buck than you should be in like a 3-hour movie. Like it feels like you're everything is dense enough to be pulled out. And I think that's where the movie really succeeds in my mind, is I'm still thinking about those things, still thinking about those relationships, thinking about Michael, thinking about the comparison between him and Vito, thinking about the arc of Michael's whole character in the long term. Like, I don't know. I think it's honestly really impressive at how much is packed into so little, I guess.
Yeah, we've been spending a lot of time being fairly critical or really dissecting the second movie. I think I want to close our thoughts on The Godfather Part 1 and 2 like sort of in a package, because the last episode Cameron and I didn't give it a rating. We didn't even go over the shot of the film, and I think this movie ricochets a lot off the first one. I want to have a conversation back to the origin of like what this show is about for the casual viewer. Cameron, you mentioned in your first in the first film's review that this is like an active watching experience, right? I have a ton of difficulty like feeling like I can recommend these movies. They feel like just extremely difficult for me, and I can't even really fully. I've tried to explain within these last like what, if you can include the 2 episodes, like about 2.5 hours of conversation, like why I'm feeling this disconnect with them. And I like there's so much I enjoy about them too. I hope I'm not being too down on them. I mean, one of the scenes I couldn't stop thinking about was like how Vito kept like buying fruit as a young guy, and how that just calls back to like the first one. I'm like, not the fruit, that's such a sad scene, in the first one. But I just, from like a modern ADHD person watching movies, this feels like a homework assignment, This feels like a book. You could say that, right? Like it feels like reading The Grapes of Wrath and sitting there and pulling out all the good stuff, but it takes a lot of time to chew on, and a lot of people hate The Grapes of Wrath. You know what I mean? So like it's difficult for me as a casual to be like, go watch this movie. But what's weird to me is that so many people have told me that about this franchise, and I'm shocked by that. You know, like I'm shocked that so many people have an admiration for something that seems hardcore to me.
That's actually interesting because there a lot of the movies, if you look at the top IMDb, like the audience favorite movies, are movies that are very accessible and very fun on a gut level.
Yeah.
And even the first Godfather to me seems like the sort of movie where you'd get a lot of people, the way when The Irishman came out, there are many people who loved it, but there are a lot of people who said, this is kind of boring. I don't know. It's not super great. And what? You gotta be quiet. Sorry, Cos just walked in the room. You can cut that part out. Especially The Godfather 2, I'm just like shocked that people rate this as highly, and because I can just feel like most people, I think a lot of people maybe just think they're supposed to like it. You know, like there's a lot of movies where you know, as we talked about before, you feel cool liking a certain thing. These movies feel like really intellectual, and so that you feel like, oh, I guess it's good. But it does surprise me that so many people like it so much.
Yeah, I don't know. I would say, like, in terms of accessibility, it really isn't a very accessible movie at all.
The second one in particular.
Yeah. I even the first one, I can understand why someone would have it would be challenging for someone. This one, I think, feels like a step beyond that in a lot of ways. It's like it's almost like too much packed in. But at the same time, I kind of feel like I was contemplating what you were saying yesterday, Juzo, about would this be better if it was sort of like a mini series or broken up into that way. I don't know if it would be better, but I definitely could see approaching it like that. In the same way that, like, Lord of the Rings, I think, is much more approachable if you break it up into smaller bits, and in some ways, like, it works well even doing that. You know, there's definitely breaks and things that you could do. This movie, I'm not sure if you could break it up as easily because everything pulls together a lot. Like even stuff from the first movie, like you have to kind of be paying attention to if you're going to catch things in the second movie, or if, you know, things get brought back. Like the scene with Roth, I remember really being a little bit revelatory, where he talks about how that man was Mo Green, and he was like really upset about Mo Green.
That's a great scene too, where he's talking about, like, I never asked who put out the hit. You know, I never asked. Like, that's like, I don't know. That was like, there's all these small character, like, interactions in this movie that are, like, complex and awesome, but you just have to get through all these weird other moments that it's very, like, up and down. It's disorienting. I think that's why I was having a hard time coming up with an opinion on this one. But I'm trying to make clear. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Cameron.
No, it's okay. But I mean, my point with all that is that I don't think this is a very accessible movie, but I think it's worth the exercise in a lot of ways. In the same way that, like, your English teacher will give you Shakespeare and be like, all right, well, you're not going to have fun, but let's dissect this. Let's take this apart. Because in some ways there's a lot of value in that. There's a lot of value. I think this is for someone who wants to level up their film watching game in a lot of ways, who wants to exercise that part of their brain. I think this is a great place to even start. I mean, if you're someone who wants to sort of get deeper into the thinking about film, thinking about character, thinking about storytelling, these movies are really really an amazing place to do that, because there's so much packed into such a tiny package. It's just like everything plays off each other, and everything feels there's so much to think about with all these characters. There's so much to talk about with all these characters. It feels like this episode felt more like a book club than like a a movie reviewing podcast. Because there's it just feels like it feels like there's so much to discuss in a lot of ways. In the same way that a book, there's so much to discuss. So
yes, I think my criticism around this is that, like, Juzo's right. Like, it's on the IMDb top 100, right? And I know a lot of people who are casually into film that would be like, I'm going to go down that list. And I could see this movie completely destroying them, if I'm being honest. Like, I could see people watching this and being like, what am I, like, wow, maybe this whole, like, top 100 thing is not for me. And there's so many movies that I've seen in that top 100 that I'm like, no, it's worth it. Like, I was one of those people. Don't let this movie end that for you. You know, I agree with you, Cameron. I think this is a movie to upgrade your analytical hat, per se. I just don't know a lot of people who are able to do that or willing to do that. And you're in that world. You're passionate about that world. I'm trying to come along for that journey. It's this one's tough. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but it's tough. I'm trying hard to be fair to the movie. I don't think I want to watch these movies again for a long time, and maybe coming back to them would be positive. I think
when you watch the first one again, you'll see a lot of, like, once you know the plot, like once you understand it, I think that was the biggest hurdle for me, is just figuring out what, like, literally what is going on.
No, I totally agree. I think this second movie made the first one better, to its credit. So that's, I mean, that's a cool
It informs
response.
the emotion of it a lot.
Yeah. Juzo, what are your closing thoughts on these two films? I know it's a trilogy, but nobody talks about the third one. Is that right?
Well, the reputation of the third one is that it's terrible. And there's a famous aspect of it that Coppola cast his daughter in a very key role. And everyone said she's really terrible. Now, when I saw it, I didn't think she was that bad. But again, I might have just felt some charity. And also, I had heard how bad it was. You know, maybe my expectations were just, through the floor. But I didn't think the movie was that bad. Frankly, I don't think it's that much worse than the second one. I think they're both just kind of pretty good movies. But my closing thoughts about, I think these are movies everyone should see, because I think so many people like them. I think there's a good chance you'll like, especially the first one. I think most people end up liking the first one, at least maybe if they see it a second time. But they are difficult movies to get into, and I can certainly understand some of the reticence about, like, how entertaining they are, or how also just emotionally engaging they are. I think that's one distinction between this and Breaking Bad, which we were talking about, which is that Breaking Bad, the character is obviously more relatable, and by definition, he's an everyman. He's sympathetic. He shows regret for his actions in a more overt way. I don't know if that really makes one of them better than the other, though I think I like Breaking Bad a lot more than The Godfather, even the first Godfather. And I do think the expansive nature of a TV series, we're talking about Ozark as well, that can lead to a lot more depth and having relationships fleshed out, family relationships fleshed out more in a way that the movies can't. And I don't think it's as big a problem in the first movie, just because I think what you're seeing even though there's things that, even like Fredo is kind of underdeveloped in that movie, it almost doesn't matter, because every moment in that movie that you're watching, at least to me, is so well crafted that you're like, I don't know, it's hard to find fault with something that's this brilliantly made. But I think that it's worth, if you haven't seen it, you're definitely checking out it, especially the first one. But just know that you don't watch it when you're tired. You have to pay closer attention than you would, I think. Something like Goodfellas, is telling you a lot of these things, and it's not. And by the way, when you guys were talking about Goodfellas, I don't think Goodfellas is any less deep of a movie or any lesser of a film. I think, in fact, it's probably a greater film than The Godfather. But it's just two different approaches to the same subject matter.
Well said. Well said. Cameron, I'm stamping for both of them for the curious on this. Like, you got to be bought in. You got to be ready to go for it. I don't know if I was ready to go enough, and maybe that's what resulted in my reaction. The second one, I felt more prepped just because of the first film. So,
and then that made you appreciate the first one more.
Yeah,
which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, it's part of. I think that's part of the experience with watching these, right?
Yeah.
Cameron, what do you think for everyone, for casuals, curious, cinephiles?
I want to agree with you, Isaac, in that it is. You do have to be aware. You do have to be prepared to watch this movie. Especially this one, I would say, is much more for the curious. The first one, I could probably put it at everyone, because it is one of those things where, I think even if it's a movie that you don't like or don't understand or don't get the first time, it's just one of those movies you got to see. It really is just on the list of it's a movie that you should see.
Yeah, that's why I was saying for everyone. I don't really mean, if we're talking about like the rating scale based on what do I think, who do I think would like it? I don't think these are for everyone in any regard. Like, I don't think like just whatever, I don't know. I'm not sure, like someone like you, Isaac, or like, I'm not sure if you watch them with Jules, like what she would think of these movies.
Oh, she hated the first film.
Yeah,
she hated it. She thought it was like, not only, I think part of it was that it was grounded, so any violence in it was horrific to her, which I didn't think it was all that, like,
interesting.
I didn't think it was that intense. But to her, she was like...
Well, I think the violence in the first one is actually much more shocking and much more abrupt. I think it catches you way more off guard than this movie. This movie, there's less violence and there's more like setup to everything. But the first movie, I think, is one where it's like everything that happens is just It does feel brutal, I think. Even if you don't see it, it's not like people are like, getting their heads blown off or something. It's not like, even, I think Goodfellas probably has more violent sequences, probably.
There's more violence in it, but the tone of The Godfather is so laid back that those parts stand out more harshly than they do in Scorsese's movies.
And in some ways it almost like scares you, the violence. You're like, whoa, like so I can totally sympathize with Jules in that it's pretty upsetting. There's stuff in that first movie where you're like, phew, geez, you're like, that's serious.
Whereas, I mean, you look at the scene with like Fredo's death and the gun, like you see the gun just barely out of the frame, it's just zooming in, what's coming, right? I feel like most of the deaths in this movie are set up with so much time that it's coming in part two. Whereas the first one, it's like, I'm buying fruit and bang, 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 bang. Like, what the heck just happened?
Well, like Luca
right?
Brasi, he just walks into a bar and, and then stab his hand. And you're like, geez. That one scared me when I watched this in high school. I was like, oh my gosh, like that's
his
that's
eyes
serious.
Bulge. There's also a thing that Coppola he never scores the violence too. I think we were talking about this, Cameron, how he doesn't. It always comments on the violence after the fact, but it always happens very harshly, like not with any kind of dramatic. It's just very matter of fact. That's makes it very effective.
Yeah, no, totally. Cameron, do you want to close out? Any final? I mean, we've covered a lot, so
we have. I do want to talk about the shot of the film for both of them, probably. For me, I mean, there's so many in this movie that are just beautiful. I love Juzo was talking about his gun on fire, which is awesome. I think the sequence where Fredo is talking to the kid, as he's fishing and he's talking about his Hail Marys, I think it's just like so wonderful. And I was trying to think. There was one other.
Walking in front of the fireworks.
Yes. When De Niro is at the end after he shoots the guy.
Finucci, yeah.
He's walking down the street, and there's these fireworks that are going after, behind him. It's just gorgeous set piece. And then in the first one, I'm trying to think of the one that stands out to me. I don't know. Well, you guys go for your Godfather Part Two shot of the film.
For me, I really enjoyed the part with De Niro on the roof. He's like put in the upper left quadrant of the screen, and it's following along. The frame is sort of split at the lower part by the roof edge, and it just keeps cutting back to that with him walking. I was like, this is stunning. Like, I don't remember anything like this in the first Godfather, where there's so much attention to the cinematography. The second movie, I think, has a lot more of those shots framed well. Although I did notice that the second movie had this, I don't know if it was like an ISO grain or something because everything was so low light, but it just seemed grainy. I've seen older movies that looked sharper. I don't know if it was the way it was filmed or it was very weird, but
it could be where you were watching it too.
I watched it on Amazon streaming. So it was just.
Was it in like darker scenes? I feel like I might have seen that.
There's a little bit of grain, yeah, but there's a lot more. I think there's like more dark sequences in this movie, probably. Like a lot of it happens at night, and
well, I noticed it early on, like when I was trying to look at the backgrounds for Tahoe. So in the outdoor sections, it was grainy. I was like, "What the heck is happening here?" So I wish maybe there was a way I could see it in some sort of restored form because I think that would have looked amazing. But that for me it was the rooftop. Like pan follow.
Juzo.
Well, you said most of mine from the second movie. Like I love, of course, De Niro hiding and then shooting the guy and his cloth catching fire, the fireworks, and then the third one that's a classic shot is, young Vito looking out. The Statue of Liberty is reflected. That's just an amazing shot. And I also really like when they arrive at Ellis Island and there's these beautiful sort of tableaus following, like, and then tracking across all the people. That's really nice. The first movie is less showman-like, and I thought it was really funny, Isaac, how you were saying it. You felt like you were watching through binoculars because when I was watching with my dad, he was commenting on how much of the movie is shot with telephoto lenses, which actually would give the movie that effect. And the first movie, it's not really like a fancy shot in terms of like, oh, beautiful cinematography, but I think in some ways it might be the most impactful one is when there's just a push-in on Pacino when he's sitting and he's about to kill Sollozzo.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. And it just, the guy's talking to him, but he's not really hearing it. He's just pushing in, and then the subway is getting louder and louder.
Yeah. The sound in that scene, that's probably the most exciting moment in that movie for sure.
It's an incredible scene. Yeah.
And then for me, I love the shot of, they drive up, you see the Statue of Liberty, then there's the sort of like wheat field in front. And he's like, I'm going to take a look. I got to take a leak. And
that's great.
Just an amazing shot. A similar one.
And the guy's hand comes up.
Yeah. Similar one in the second movie where it's Vito. They're stealing the rug, and there's the doorway. And you see the police officer, and he's like, he's ready to shoot.
Clemenza's standing there. Yeah. That's
an amazing shot.
One other one I like in the first movie also is when Vito dies in the tomato garden. That's just kind of a beautiful moment.
That's a great scene in general. I mean, it's just so sweet and interesting. I'm trying to think of the other ones for the first movie. It's not quite, like you said, it's not quite as showmanly. Although I do still think it is beautiful. I mean, it is a beautiful movie. Just the lighting, everything involved. There's this like, there's this like glow, and everybody has sort of this, contour. It looks like like a Renaissance painting. It's like it's very beautiful in that way.
There's a direct lighting moment that I noticed in the second movie at the very beginning when the senator's talking to Michael in his office and he's like half lit. His face is super dark, but he begins to threaten Michael. He walks forward and his like whole face begins to like be lit by the light. And it's just, it's like his challenge to Michael, like his power challenge is like coming forth right in that scene.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cool moments of lighting, especially in the first one with anything in the office, right?
Oh yeah. No, I love all this stuff with Brando in the office. That's great. Classic Gordon Willis.
I know.
Lighting. That guy was just
He's on another level.
something else. Yeah.
Well,
Very interesting. Yeah. Can I say one more thing about the movie? Do you
Go
mind
for
if
it.
I-
Yeah. We're running a little long. We're gonna wrap it up and do it.
Yeah, I know, but it was just James Gray, the director, was talking about The Godfather, and he said something really interesting, which is that it's the hardest great movie to make, and because there's no gimmicks to this. I'm not sure if I've said this to you, Cameron, but like there's not like a high concept. It's not about like an important subject, something that would have an emotional weight to it. There's not even really any there's well composed shots, but there's none of the showmanship you see in Scorsese's movies. I sort of wonder if that might be why the movie also is kind of a little hard to get into, because all it is just a great story, well told, or pretty well told in the case of the second movie. I guess maybe the second movie has a little bit of a high concept of the cross-cutting between the two of them or going back and forth, but it is sort of, when you compare it to all the other movies in the top 250, there's not the big emotions and sentimentality of Shawshank or the real-time kind of like intensity of 12 Angry Men or something like that, and certainly not the flashiness of something like Goodfellas or Pulp Fiction or whatever. It's more akin to a Sidney Lumet movie than a Scorsese movie in many ways. And I just I don't know. I wonder if that's sort of why it can be difficult to get into, I think.
Yeah, good thoughts. I mean, I can't refute what you're saying. So,
yeah, I don't know. Just a small closing thing anyway.
Yeah.
I think, Cameron, we're not doing part 3. Do you have any reasoning for the audience for that, besides the fact that you just don't like it?
I don't know. I haven't seen it.
You should watch it, Isaac.
I don't know.
That's right. Cameron hasn't seen it.
I haven't seen it. So the reason why we're not doing part 3 is it's not considered like a genuine classic. It's not considered part of the canon. It's nothing other than that. Not that I have anything against it. I haven't seen it. So
you guys should just watch it. Even if you don't do it as a main episode, you should just watch it as the completion of the thing.
No, if it cracks 4 hours, I'm out. I can't.
No, it's shorter than both of the other ones, but it's I don't know. I even think in some ways, because Michael is such a different character in that one, and he's a little bit warmer, and he's more like modern Pacino. I think it might actually have fewer hurdles, especially for you, Isaac, just because it's not this like icy, emotionless psychopath. At least as far as memory serves. I saw this like 6 years ago, but you should definitely check it out. I'm definitely gonna watch it. Refresh my memory, see if I think it holds up.
Well, we'll see what we do next, Cameron. Did you have a different vision, or maybe we'll just dive into 3?
No, I think we're gonna. I haven't decided, but I think we're gonna do another filmmaker month this next month. But I gotta pick who we're doing. Juzo had a good idea about a documentary month as well. I think that would be good. But I would like to pull him in on that because I'm not like a documentary expert in any way. I've definitely watched my fair share of documentaries, but it's not. It's not my area of expertise. So, I think
I want to pick 3 documentaries that I think you guys would love and are great, and then one that Isaac will literally never have me on the podcast afterwards. And I think that'd be a week for great podcasting.
Oh, jeez. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Juzo, thank you for joining us for this episode.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, some extra context. Cameron, thank you for being yourself. And we post every Monday. If you enjoy the show, we're going to be doing more movies And feel free to go back and listen to our last episode or other episodes if you're interested on some of our takes. Juzo appears on some of those shows as well. We love you guys. Thanks for supporting the show and everything, and we'll see you next week. Cinema Spectator is an ECFS Productions podcast, executive produced by Darren O'Neill. If you want your name read in the credits of the show, you can check us out at patreon.com/ECFS Productions to achieve this status. Thank you, Darren, for the support, and for the rest of you, we appreciate your support as well. Have a good one.